Anisha, I think we can start now.
Okay, ma'am. It is being assumed that you are giving your consent to share the recording of this meeting on social media pages. A very good evening to all present here. This is Anisha Kalra from our very own prestigious Kirodimal College. We've all gathered here today, virtually of course, for an extremely enlightening session by Sankalp Gupta, who is a golden graduate peer of ours on the subject Reimagining Healthcare Delivery. I'm sure that we all have been eagerly waiting for this day since we have now stepped towards the fourth day of the KM Alma Connect 2021 to celebrate the Founders Day week. With this, I officially welcome our precious guest and request Seema ma'am to take over. Seema ma'am?
Yeah. Good evening, everyone. And today, from the list of participants, what I can make out is that there are a few new participants who have joined, and I think it will be highly appropriate if I brief them about the background of this event. As all of you are aware that every year we celebrate Founders Day on February 1st. And this year, Kirorimal College Alumni Network thought that we will have 1 week celebrations of Founders Day. And we started on the eve of January 31st. As Anisha very well said, that we have entered the fourth day of these Founders Day week celebrations. Those who have been regularly attending panel discussions and speaker sessions designed and organized by this network, they must have understood by now that how and why it is important to celebrate our young alumni achievers. You must have realized by now that how apt is the theme for these week-long celebrations chosen by KMC Alumni Network. I would like to share with you that this recently formed Kirorimal College Alumni Network intends to engage, motivate, and celebrate our young alumni achievers on the one hand and act as a bridge between the alumni and the current students on the other. This connecting arrangement is an outcome of the sensitivity, stand, and support of our principal ma'am. We at KMC Alumni Network very well understand that with the largest population of youth in the world present in India, the task of educating them first and making them productive members of society later is a very challenging task. This task has become harder with the onset of COVID-19 pandemic, which impacted over 320 million learners in India and led to unemployment of more than 5 million young people during the year 2020. Therefore, a proactive measure during this pandemic has been undertaken at Kirorimal College Alumni Network by engaging with its young alumni community and providing them with a forum for exchange of ideas on academic, cultural, and various issues of current relevance with the students at KMC who are currently pursuing their studies. We are aiming at ensuring learning continuity of our students during this uncertainty. We want to help our students in building their 21st century skills, as I emphasized in my talk yesterday also. But we also know for that exchanging information and experiences is crucial so that we can learn from each other. We also want to assist our students in overcoming their COVID-triggered anxieties through their continuous involvement in academic and experience sharing sessions carried out through this network. I am fully confident that these sessions will provide many inspiring moments and plenty of cause for reflection. We at this Kirorimal College Alumni Network are also looking forward to foster and promote close relationships amongst the alumni themselves and with their very young juniors in KMC through this network. Through this platform, we are also giving an opportunity to our own alumni to acknowledge their gratitude to their alma mater and to have a continuing interest and loyalty to KMC. With these words, I extend a very warm welcome to another young alumnus of KMC, Mr. Sankalp Gupta, in KMC Alma Connect 2021 event. Sankalp, we want to celebrate your achievements together today evening in this event. Over to Anisha.
Taking the meet forward, I must now introduce our elevated guest. Sankalp is a director at Dr. Clinic Laboratory, a private limited company that serves needs of people of Rajasthan. 2009, he went on to pursue law from Faculty of Law, Delhi University. Moreover, post a brief stint in a legal firm, he joined his managed business in his hometown Jaipur in January 2016. In the past 4 years, the company has expanded vertically and horizontally and has been innovating new business healthcare models. Sankalp is actively involved in the top level strategy making and execution, particularly focused on strengthening the departments of finance, technology, and HR. Moreover, he is also a travel enthusiast and is highly passionate about photography. It's an honor and a once in a lifetime opportunity to hear from you, Sankalp. Now, formally ask you to begin with your session.
Right. Thank you so much, Anisha, for that warm welcome. And thank you so much, Seema ma'am, for giving me this opportunity to share my experience with everyone. Also would want to congratulate the entire college administration on taking such a great initiative. Uh, Really, this gives the alumni a platform to really exchange ideas with the current students. So really congratulations and really commendable efforts.
Thank you so much.
Just take 2 minutes to share my screen. Right. I hope everyone can see the screen.
Yeah, we can.
Right. So reimagining healthcare delivery. I mean, this topic really encompasses my experience of last 5 years since I joined the company. And I'll start with the, my personal journey, what it has been, and would want to conclude with, say, key learnings what I have had in during my 5 to 6 years of working experience. So just I think Anisha has introduced me well, and would briefly introduce myself. I passed out from Kirodimal College in 2012, and I did BCom honors from there, and then went on to pursue law in the year 2015. Like a lot of students, in fact, I also had a confusion in my mind, especially after investing 6 years of my time in education, and after pursuing law, I had this option to whether to practice law or really whether to get back to my family business, where also I can make a mark. Uh, I did several internships during my law career. I was executive committee member in Mood Court Society, and was in fact uh, willing to take up law career. But after working briefly for say 4 5 months, maybe I realized that you know really I it'll be better if I go back to my hometown and really serve what I'm passionate about. I started working at Dr. Bilal Clinical Laboratory in January 2016, and I started from the say roots. I mean, I started from the ground where I worked as an executive. I learned what is it like, to be a frontliner, to deal with a customer. What are the customer expectations? How are we serving them? And really moved from there. Uh, just this was a background about me, and because we'll be discussing healthcare, and we'll be discussing my experience in the company. Very briefly, I would want to also tell you about what this company is about. And primarily, this company is, in a layman's term, it's a diagnostic company which specializes in pathology. So our core competency is pathology. By diagnostic, we understand, pathology, radiology, and a lot of things. But we do radiology, but we specialize in pathology. Radiology, we do it primarily for complementing our pathology business. It has been a very long journey. In fact, we were established in 1991. My father is a doctor. He established it in 1991 with the motto of serves best and serves all. And uh, it has a test menu of 1200 plus tests. So we have a reference lab in Jaipur where we are catering to almost every kind of test that is happening around, including the specialized tests, semi-specialized tests. And I believe that we're doing the highest number of tests in Rajasthan. And so presently we are in more than 13 cities in Rajasthan only, with more than 50 collection centers. We have also expanded our reach through regional laboratories. So we have 6 regional laboratories in Rajasthan, mainly in tier 2 cities across Rajasthan. We're working with several, corporate parties. We're associated with more than 2000 plus doctors, hospitals, nursing homes, where they send their specialized work or specialized tests to us, where they don't have the expertise or competency to do it. They outsource it to us. We serve more than 5 lakh patients every year, and we presently we have more than 500 plus healthcare professionals, doctors, paramedics employed with us. So and also, just to sum up, we were in fact the first diagnostic chain in Rajasthan to be authorized by ICMR to perform COVID-19 tests. And till date, we've done more than 2 lakh tests, COVID-19 tests. It, it's a matter of I'm very proud to say that we've served public in these difficult times. And really it was a very difficult and challenging year for every one of us, but I believe it was more challenging for us, especially serving or catering to that kind of demand. In fact, there were times when we had done more than say 2500 tests in a day. And we'd we'd expanded our OPD center we had, where we attended close to 1300 patients in a day. I think that would be almost highest across India, if I would have to term it, where in a single day 1300 patients, right from say pre-analytic or right from sample collection to report delivery, we've done in a single day. So this is about what Dr. Bilal Clinical Laboratory is. And I think before really starting my journey, let us look at this industry and let us understand about this industry. So Indian healthcare services, I mean, at this moment, India's healthcare service is still highly underpenetrated. Our population is ever growing. We're supposed to touch 1.42 billion in year 2026, and still our percentage spending of GDP is very low as compared to the other countries as shown in the slide. The market is continuously growing. I mean, if you look, 27.5% CAGR is what is expected in next 5 years for the healthcare to grow. So let us talk about diagnostic industry. Diagnostic industry is becoming very important, and I think everyone must have realized its importance when the COVID struck every one of us. Even I think for those who don't know, say almost 70% of the diagnosis that happens, they need intervention of diagnostic services. So there is ever growing demand for preventive healthcare that is increasing. Diseases like chronic diseases like hypertension, diabetes, they're continuously growing, where diagnostic industry has a very huge role to play in diagnosing really and assessing whether human body is working fine or not, right? So market segmentation within diagnostic, there are two segments if we would broadly divide it as imaging and pathology. Majorly 70% of the revenue in the complete diagnostic is contributed by pathology. Pathology as a business line is highly scalable because of its model, which we'll discuss it after this slide. And 30% is contributed by imaging. So imaging, for those who don't know, imaging is majorly radiology business. Say, for example, CT scans, MRIs, X-rays, those are included in imaging. And pathology, I think I'm if in a layman term, pathology is, say, what you test using fluids, body fluids, blood, and assess whether the human body is working fine or not. So even now, urban population of India, they contribute to 65% of total revenues of diagnostic industry. So we talked about penetration. Even now, what we realize is tier 2 cities, tier 3 cities, leave aside rural areas, there is a huge gap in qualitative services of diagnostics or overall healthcare services in those areas. And the spending also reflects that. I mean, even now, say, when we're referring to this chart, 28% of urban population contributes to 65%. When we talk about how is it diagnostic industry set up in terms of formalized and informalized way, formal diagnostics is what I would term it as, say, regional diagnostic chains or national diagnostic chains. And there are standalone centers that are located in everywhere across India, and they are contributing their bit. Still, even today, the market is highly dominated by informal sector, and diagnostic chains have 16% market share across the total market. So that is where the diagnostic industry is standing. Although the diagnostic industry is in process of major consolidation, I mean, as the government interventions and regulations have started getting in, the informal sector has started to consolidate informal sector. So we're seeing a major consolidation, but it would, I think, further take time to really have that space. So let us talk about, what happens uh, when you give your blood sample. I am sure everyone of you must have given your blood sample, and you must be wondering what really happens after you give your blood sample. So usually, and this is a practice that is prevalent across all the say players. um, this is a model followed by almost all the players. Leave aside some, but primarily what happens is there is a reference lab. Like we have a reference lab in Jaipur, which has the highest array of tests that it can perform. It can perform specialized, super specialized, routine tests, all kind of tests, and of course it has a limited reach. And for expanding that reach, it uh, creates spokes. So it creates spokes as collection centers, collection points, which are attached to those labs. So it works on hub and spoke model, as I have also mentioned on the slide. Hubs being those labs where processing takes place, and spokes being, where we can expand the reach of that processing capability. So these days, a lot of home collections also take place, where collections can take place at person's home, and similarly, those also act as a spokes. And when the samples are consolidated, they are taken to reference lab by efficient logistics. Of course, because there is uh, say a limitation of turnaround time when we're talking about a single territory. So for example, if I have to serve a city like Udaipur from Jaipur, it's really not possible to get all those samples in Jaipur, because it'll take time, and then that is where turnaround time would compromise. Patients expect their reports, say, same day or maximum within 24 hours, and that is not possible using this model. So that is where we extend our reach using a satellite laboratory. So a satellite laboratory is primarily a laboratory which has capabilities to process routine tests, semi-specialized tests. So routine tests are, say, HbA1cs, glucose, sugar, CBCs, and semi-specialized would be, say, hormonal tests and all of those kind of things. But majorly in our experience and what we have done is we've created satellite labs which have capability to cater to at least 85 to 90% of the requirement of that territory, and rest it outsource, or it sends the samples to a reference lab. And why this model is scalable? Because again, you can leverage economies of scale. You have that one single processing unit where you can control the quality. You can leverage economies. So this is what is about the model that is prevalent in the market. If you term, because I'll be referring a lot of these things, so I'm briefly describing. Majorly, clinical laboratory is divided into three processes. It's pre-analytic, analytic, and post-analytic. Pre-analytic is when you give the samples, a sample collection process and process before that. Analytic is simple processing of samples when it reaches the lab, and post-analytic is interpretation of those test results, correlating the test results with the patient, with patient's clinical history, and really informing if there are any critical values. So team of pathologists, paramedical staff is required to collect, process, and interpret test results. There are some, facts that I am sure many of you would not know. So approximately 70% of all the errors that take place in diagnostics happen at pre-analytic stage. So that is very interesting fact, because a lot of you or a layman assumes that, error may have happened during the process or anything, but majority of the analytical processes are very streamlined in majority of the laboratories, and the actual error happens at pre-analytic stage. Pre-analytic stage being, say, a patient being misidentified as someone else, barcode being exchanged, a sample when collected being hemolyzed for not being in a proper temperature. There can be several reasons. I mean, when we have created our SOPs, there are approximately 20 to 25 checkpoints that we need to ensure during our pre-analytic stage. And because it has a lot of manual intervention, chances of error are most in this stage. Also, a fact that less than 1% of total laboratories in India are NABL accredited. So NABL is a body that really accreditates your laboratory for following set processes, protocols, and it's a body that comes under quality control of India. So only even now, even today, less than 1% of total laboratories in India are NABL accredited. Right. So moving on, I mean, let us, I would start my journey by really telling everyone that when I joined the business in January 2016. And where we were in 2015, Dr. Bilal Clinical Lab had, completed 25 years then, and it was doing well. I mean, honestly, my father had done a great job in creating a fantastic organization with all the bases right, with all of the fundamentals of business right, with right ethics, with right a lot of things that were rightly placed. And I thought it was a very right platform to really make that impact in the society. We were in Jaipur, we were not in other cities, and we had 20 collection centers then. And we were primarily, more of a person dependent company. I mean, my father had the center stage, all of the decisions, all of the authority flew from there. And it was more of a person dependent, a lot of employees that were working in the organization and are still were working since, say, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. And a lot of things were, say, restricted to that person's knowledge. They were not documented processes that were in place. Business was functioning in more of a conventional way, like it functions in a lot of organizations. It was not that structured. We didn't have a, say, organization hierarchy. We didn't have structure. We didn't have a lot of communication modes, and use of technology was also very limited. Also, we had purpose. It was not that we didn't have purpose, but there was no clear communication of the purpose of the organization. There was vision, there was mission, but really, if you would ask the employees then, they would not very strongly know, they would not discuss, what path organization is going and how it is going. And and there were certain challenges in, as I've written in the slide as well, in driving employees' performance. I mean, we were controlling a very small span of territory. And there we thought, we were physically present in a lot of those locations, and it was functioning because we were there. There were not standardized protocols, processes. There was not decentralized authority where people can, center managers can take that accountability and really perform, whether you're, physically there or not there. And that is where we also faced challenges in driving employees' performance. And last was, lack of data visibility. We really had this gap of data visibility. I mean, a lot of matrix that we had defined, on, their job scorecard and everything, but we didn't have that data, tangible data or quantifiable data, to really assess the performance and also know really where organization is going. Where we had data, the veracity of that data was questioned again and again because it came from different sources. And so that was, one challenge that we had. And really then as next generation came into the business, we really thought where we would want to take this business. And of course, because it had such a great fundamentals in place, it had all of those things right in place. And because of the nature of business, which was very easy to scale, we really thought that we should prepare organization for a very scalable and sustainable growth. And we wanted growth, but we wanted fast growth, but we wanted a sustainable growth. I mean, growth that can be sustained. It was not that we just go on a spree of expansion and then realize that whether we have the right back office to sustain that growth. So what did we do? I mean, first of all, we assessed. I mean, we had experience of 25 years, and we knew that what our customer is expecting. And we made our 3 pillars where we categorized what our customer required, be it quality, convenience and accessibility, personalization, wherein we assess the requirements with the changing dynamics and thought how we can deliver this to, we were delivering this in Jaipur, how we can deliver it to when we go in a newer territory, how we can standardize our processes, how we can make the experience of customer uniform wherever he goes. So, those were the questions that we had. We knew what we had to do. The question was whether we can execute it and really how to execute it. And, first thing we did was to define the purpose. We had a vision, we had mission, but we reinvented that in line of really what we wanted from there. And we recreated our vision, we recreated our mission, and had in mind how would we get there. We set our core values, our guiding principles, which we defined as CARE. I mean, it's an acronym for customer first, accountability, respect and trust, and excellence. Those we believed were our guiding principles or behaviorals that would guide everyone in taking the organization to that level. And this was our first step. And we defined where we wanted to be. So we defined that we wanted to be a leading healthcare partner or a leading diagnostic laboratory in India. And we did not just want that expansion to take place, we also wanted to really give that value to the customer. We wanted customer satisfaction, which of course was in our values, because in last 25 years as well, when I had taken over, we were primarily a B2C oriented brand, which believed in serving customer, giving value to customer, and customer satisfaction was very important for us. So we made it a point, we included it in our vision statement that for us, it's important, growth is important, but we want that customer satisfaction with that. And we also defined some, how do we want to reach there, and what will be those driving factors that would drive that growth. And we defined primarily 3 things, which were advanced technology, self-led team, and innovation. And we believe that, we firmly believe that 3 T's that we had defined, that was talent, training, and technology, can really make that difference to ensure that we achieve that growth and we sustain that growth. So this was the first step that we had taken, where we defined the purpose of the organization. I mean, very often we plan our lives, we plan everything. Very often I've seen that we plan to, define purpose in the organization. And maybe we have defined, but during the course of execution, we forget that, this is our vision, this is our mission, this is what guides us, binds us, these are our values. And we ensured that, each and every stakeholder of ours is well aware of this, vision, mission, and value statement. And that is primarily what we did from there. Uh, we ensured over communication of vision, mission, and core values. I am sure over communication is not a positive term, but really we over communicated that, because we wanted everyone's, life in the company to be guided with that statement. And that is where we used different strategies. We used visual aids. We started our meetings with vision, mission, and values. We imbibed it in our culture. And, we also brought it in our actions. I mean, it was not that we was just saying that, this is our vision, this is our values, these are our values. We acted right from top level. We showed the way, we acted, we took our decisions based on those values. And one more strategy that we used in communication of vision, mission, was we identified those change agents, primarily being our department heads, and also, key person that were engaged and that were high performing. We use them as change agents, because it was really not a very easy task to imbibe that vision, mission, and value statement into each and every stakeholder's mind. So that is what we did. The second thing that we did was we strengthened our HR and training learning department. So this is a service industry. I mean, even now a majority of our cost, I mean, if you look at our cost centers, HIL will be dominated by the salaries. And we knew that if anything that is going to drive this company will be its talent. And there were a lot of challenges that we had faced in our past, whether be it the right, not getting the right person, not attracting the right talent, not correctly onboarding the right talent. We had a very many first year departures during our initial years, say in 2016 and 17. And we knew that we have to focus our HR department. There was no substitute for that. And that is where we worked on HR department. We structured it. We had specialized resources for talent acquisition, recruitment. We created policies, processes that matched the market benchmarks. And we ensured that we had specialized department for onboarding, for employee engagement, for say their queries related to operations or payroll processing. So we did all that. We had I mean, it may not have sounded that wise to a lot of people as to why you're investing so much in your back office, but we knew that if we have to create that a scalable model, we need to have that right talent. And then second thing was training of that talent. I mean, there is you have to train your resources, you have to work for them. We started from, say, KSA analysis, that is knowledge, skill, and aptitude analysis of each and every employee. And that is where we benchmarked it to market, and we knew that these are our training gaps. And we created a complete training and learning department into our organization. So I think, before starting anything, we knew that HR department was our focus point, and HR will bring that talent that will again reinforce or make that growth happen. Third was defining and communicating key success metrics to all stakeholders. What was lacking was I mean, still remember that when I'd asked someone that what is the job description for this, or can you take out the KRAs, there were several job roles that had their KRAs missing. So, my focus was there cannot be a job person doing job and he does not know what is the purpose of his job, what is his key responsibilities, and how is he accountable to his job. We really focused on defining those success metrics for all stakeholders. We'd also given we also had partners in form of franchisees, and we've also defined success matrix as to what were those matrix that will really define whether you have performed well or not. And we did this for every position, every role, for each of our partner. And I feel that was very important. Fourth was using technology intervention for really revenue generation, reducing cost, data visibility. So, again, we had those metrics in place. People knew what they would have to do, but data visibility was a challenge, as I told you. So, we introduced technology that can get us right data, that can get that quantifiable data. For example, say customer satisfaction, as I had told you. So at that time, we were measuring customer feedback by offline forms. I mean, offline forms were very prone to, say, window dressing and all of that. And also, it took a lot of time to really assess and analyze those feedbacks. We introduced technology, we introduced a complete NPS mechanism where the NPS score was a key driver in assessing or measuring customer satisfaction. So, and several technologies we have introduced since then. I mean, technology has been a major driver for us in supplementing this growth. Be it, say, another example of so we have a lot of non-compliances, say employee not taking the sample correctly, or say, for example, employee registering a patient's details wrongly. And we brought in technology where the entire performance score of, or the non-compliance score of that employee gets recorded automatically on the LIS platform that we're using. So there were several initiatives that we've taken right from our back office strengthening, be it human resources, purchases, logistics. I mean, a lot of initiatives that we've taken in technology. So this was again, a very important key driver. Then we, when I talked about self-led team, again, that was important. How do we create that accountability in our resources? And we started from providing them, creating those processes and policies so that they can take their decisions at their own. We created authorization matrix so that, say, financial decisions, some other decisions can be taken at their level. So, when they started taking decisions, when they started having that accountability, when all of those metrics were being visualized, they can see their scorecard, automatically that led to a transition where people started feeling their accountability. And, that was, we asked every leader in our organization as to what resources, what do they need, and we ensured that they have all the right ecosystem to really drive that growth. So then again, robust review mechanism. We here at top level, when we've made so many taken so many initiatives and ensured that we have our teams that are self-led and independent, we needed a very strong mechanism where we can judge the performance, we can continuously give them the feedback, and we used technology for that. We ensured that there is a discipline in having that review with all of our stakeholders, and also from top to bottom. I mean, it's not at top level, but across at each level, that there was a robust review mechanism which ensured that accountability stays where it has to be. And lastly, we focused on processes and policies. I mean, that was very critical, because if you have to scale, if you have to standardize, if you have to make that uniform customer experience at every store, say a customer coming to your flagship store experiences that delight, and a customer experience has to stay similar to, if he goes in another city. So that is where processes and policies were very important, right from, what our operation policies are, how do we have to say greet, sample collection of samples, a lot of those things. I mean, uh, we ensured every department has their set of processes, internal processes. Each employee will be is very clear with the policies that are in place. This really also helped us in fastening the decisions. A lot of decisions we were able to decentralize, and uh, our leadership was able to take those decisions based on those SOPs. So, this is in short what we did, and this is how our value architecture looks like today. Uh, we have several departments where, say, marketing department, which of course has completely transformed itself, right from which customer right from customer booking to, say, report delivery. We have automated everything. We have retention we have automated retention logics that are in place. We have implemented CRM, that ensures that we acquire customer in relatively very less cost, as if we compare it to the offline mechanisms that we used to do. So earlier we used to have those pamphlets and newspaper advertisements, and now we have completely shifted ourselves to digital and online marketing, which has helped really to customize the you know to really know the target audience and customize our marketing efforts towards that. And same, I mean, this is how our value architecture looks like. I've talked about a lot in detail about the same, and I'll lastly conclude my talk with what have been my lessons from my journey. um, so first is knowing and communicating the purpose is inevitable. Again, I'd emphasized on this before as well. If you want a long-term sustainable organization, you need to have the purpose at its place. I mean, no organization, even no person can uh, survive in a longer run if he has no purpose. That is where you need to define that purpose. There is no substitute for that. Second is, changes do not come overnight. I mean, when when I started, I am a bit impatient, and I think uh, just getting that intervention, and you're sorted, and next day you'll see those changes. But it really does not happen in an organization, especially an organization which has been functioning in a similar in a way that it is used to functioning. And you need to have that person have those strategies in place as to how you will facilitate that change, and how you will ensure that that change happens. I still remember in my earlier days, people believed more in verbal communication, and there was this LAN uh, connector which people interacted, which people used for communication and used verbal communication. I planned on taking an initiative and introduced G Suite, that was uh, Google app, Gmail services, professional Gmail services, and ensured and planned to really formalize the entire communication chain. just simply implementing that email mechanism took me almost, couple of months and maybe 6 months to completely penetrate into the system. So maybe those were initial days of that change, but again, that changes do not come overnight and they do not come easily. You have to be patient to get those changes, right? And third lesson is focus on sustainable growth. Today we hear about startups, we hear a lot about valuations, we hear a lot about top line of business, sales, revenue, but finally you're doing business for profit. Finally, everyone is in the business for profit, and you cannot ignore that. Investment or funding would come, but someday you have to realize that there is no substitute for profitability, and that is where you have to focus on sustainable growth. You have to take those long-term measures. You have to invest in your company. You have to uh, keep that in your mind. Profitability always has to be in your mind. Fourth is right technology can really make things easy. So I realize that having that technology can really facilitate that change very quickly. It can automate your processes. It can reduce your dependency on manpower. Again, focusing on, say, providing standardized uniform services. I think technology can be the biggest game changer for your organization if you want to really provide those services. Say for example, if you have that application, mobile application, that customer is interacting, so it'll interact or it'll behave in a very consistent way, which manual or which human behavior cannot do. So I think technology really can make things very easy, especially if you want to scale your business. Your employees are your first customers. I am sure a lot of you must have heard this, but in my personal practical experience, really, you have to give time to your employees. You have to invest in their learning, in their engagement, in their training, uh, ensuring that they're happy in your organization. If they are not happy, your customers can never be happy. Your customers can never be satisfied. So you have to ensure that your employees are your customer. They are your primary stakeholders, where you have to ensure that they're satisfied. Next, so there should be consequences for action. So consequences sounds like more of a punitive term. I get it, but that is how we use it. For us, consequences mean, say for example, no stakeholder of yours can be treated evenly or can be treated in a similar way. You have to have that differentiation for each of your stakeholder. Say for example, your employees, and you have to realize and recognize those employees that are performing well, that are giving their 100%, and that are giving their output, and you have to have the consequences. For example, you have to reward, you have to recognize, you have to promote, you have to give them bonuses. At the same time, you have to differentiate, say your bottom performers. You have to put them in PIPs. You have to ensure that they do not continue, because they will not set a good example for your organization. And again, you have to differentiate. You cannot just treat each of your stakeholder on an equal platform. You have to have consequences for each one of them, and you have to have that differentiation in your organization. Lastly, I think last would be, this is a very personal experience, that I mean, being at a leadership position can be lonely at sometimes. I felt it that it can be scary, it can be lonely, and it's stressful as well. Honestly, it's sometimes it also gets stressful, and that is where you have to see yourself different from your company. We read in our books and business studies that company is a separate legal entity, but a lot of us invest or has so much vested interest in that we are not able to see ourselves different from the company. And that is where I think you have to detach yourself, maybe in a positive way, wherein you have to see that this company not only belongs to a owner or its shareholders, but in fact to each of those partners, each of those stakeholders that are working for this company, and you have to give respect to that. Uh, you also have to see that you uh, whether in companies good times or bad times, your mind and your energy has to be focused. You cannot just if company is not doing well, you cannot be I'm uh, get into a very stressful situation. So uh, that is where I think it's very important. Let company do its job, let you yourself uh, be as a independent person who's working in the company. So uh, lastly, what I would say is, this is a quote by Tom Peters, that is the thing that keeps a business ahead of the competition is excellence in execution. What we've realized is, a lot of ideas are there, a lot of ideas those are brilliant ideas, but if not executed correctly, if not executed in the right way, uh, there is no point of those ideas. So you have to have excellence in execution. Maybe your idea can be second in the list, but your execution has to be first in the list. There cannot be any substitute for execution. So thank you so much. That is it for I would be happy to take any questions if there are any from any of the students, and would be happy to answer those. Right. Any question, if anyone has any questions?
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, Nikita, you are audible.
Okay. So my question is regarding the transitional phase. As you have been very close to the process, there must be some things or some processes which were more challenging than you thought, especially because this business is from a diagnostic industry.
Right.
So I wanted to talk about those challenges.
Right. See, challenges, say if you're terming it as a more of a technical background and I'm coming from a different background, of course that was a challenge. And right, I still remember my initial days where I was really not well versed with the product. I didn't understand the product well. I didn't know what was important in the business. And that is where uh, I mean, I started from the ground. I never hold that responsibility of directing the organization right from start. I understand. Hello. 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 Yes. Right.
I think Nikita has lost connection. Yes, you can continue, Sankalp. And can you please stop sharing the screen?
Yeah. Sure. Right.
Thanks.
Right. So Nikita, your question was those challenges. I mean, that is why I started from the ground and started from bottom, and I learned about the product. I learned what is important to the customer, how really what initiatives to be taken. I in my in fact first 8 months, 9 months, I really didn't take any initiative. I was just studying, I was just learning, and that was one of the challenge. Apart from that, if you talk about challenges, I mean, being in a family business in itself is a challenge. Really, we have different thoughts at top level, and it's really important to showcase that one common leadership or common leadership phase to the entire stakeholders. And I thought, we faced initial challenges on that also, but I think after, say, the place we're standing now, we're very comfortable, because all of that processes, policies, vision, mission helped us in really aligning ourselves also to that what organization wanted to do. Apart from that, I mean, change was difficult. As I discussed, change was very difficult to come by, and there were people who there are people who are working in the organization since last say 20 years, 15 years. It was not easy to really tell them that this is not how it should be done, this is how it should be done, because you were doing maybe in a different way, but this is how it will be done. And he'll say that this is how I have been doing since last 15 years, and I am doing very well. I mean, the organization was still doing well. So those were the challenges that were there. There were also other challenges where say getting access to right technology, getting that right vendor, what to do, attracting the talent. I mean, being in a city like Jaipur, getting that managerial talent for you was a very difficult task. It was not easy. We've still, I mean, it's a challenge that we're still facing as we're scaling. We need those competent resources. So attracting that talent. In fact, we've recruited talent from outside Jaipur as well. From one person had joined us in our top leadership recently from Delhi. So getting that again managerial talent was a challenge. So I mean, to sum it, I hope that answers your question, Nikita.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Sankalp, we have a question in the chat box, and it's asking whether you personally think whether differential piece weight system is preferred as a motivator or not.
Right. So as I talked about it, I mean, as I talked about consequences, I mean, you cannot have a common even hand for all employees. It should not be the case. If you're recognizing a performer and say bottom performer in a similar way, you know no one will perform. I mean, what is the incentive to perform for that performer, for giving that 100% to the organization? So you have to have that differential system in the organization for sure.
Excuse me, can I ask a few questions, please? I mean, I got disconnected for some reason, but I want to shoot a few questions.
Yeah,
Sure,
please.
sure. Sure, Nishkarsh.
Okay, so since this was primarily, this webinar was primarily based on pathology, and what do you think is the future of pathology, considering people are now developing algorithms and artificial intelligence is being developed to, take over the job of humans to detect, you mentioned tests like CDCs, LFT, KFT. So what if I tell you that now AI is going to take over that task for humans? What do you think is the future of, path labs, keeping in mind the AI that's being developed?
So especially, talking about technology intervention in pathology, and in my experience, we've seen in past couple of years, a lot of those AI is developing. And say, for example, when I talk about approval of results, as I talked about a very important process being, post-analytic process being approval of results that is being done by pathologists. In a lot of laboratories, what we're doing is they've correlated a lot of logics that if X value is this, if Y value is this, and then it will automatically get approved. So that is one example of how laboratories are also, taking that in. But let me very frankly tell you that there cannot be a substitute for, what human intelligence is. Artificial intelligence will definitely complement human intelligence and will make the processes more simpler, smarter. But really, if you say, whether it take over the job of humans, it will not. I mean, like other industries where the demand from human changes, that will change. Maybe, like interpretation, as I told you, maybe 4 years, 5 years down the line, a lot of those approvals of reports also would start being automated. We've also, I've also came across a startup wherein, so we have to count that blood cells. So what it does is, it captures the image, it automatically learns as to, how many blood cells are there. And then, it gives you the result automatically, very accurate to what humans are doing. It's still in pilot, but again, that'll make the job of human easier, but it'll make the job of human more specialized. For example, when you see a lot of those routine tests, for example, sugar fasting, if I'll talk about, that is now a point of care test. Everyone has that machine that, you can do the test at your home. A lot of the tests that we're doing, routine tests, would get converted into those point of care systems in future. But we, slowly, gradually shift to more super specialized testing. For example, genetic testing, for example, molecular testing. And that is where we're going. I mean, there'll be a, but of course you have to move dynamically with the environment.
So I mean, just let's take the example of genetic testing or molecular biology tests. I mean, they're obviously complex, and we haven't decoded the full genome of humans. And keeping that in mind, do you think that the current rate at which we're developing our tools and technology, and the current rate of innovation, we could actually use pathology for gene editing and I mean, basically making boutique genomics? Would that be possible in the near future? I mean, creating boutique babies and a boutique body by manipulating genes, and can that be commercialized as well?
Right. So primarily, what pathology does is it diagnoses. I mean, it does not correct, or it does not interfere with the genetic structure of human being. So, frankly, this is not what we do, and this is
No,
say,
I mean, I was just posing a general question. It's
right,
not about pathology. So
right. Honestly, I am not an expert in commenting about how that would work. What I've read is really, we're talking about this since long. I mean, I've personally been hearing about all of this since last 7-8 years, but really haven't seen any movement into it. But really, we would have to wait as to, how science is progressing. Everything is possible, but further we have to wait for it.
okay, so I mean, just one last question, and it's kind of
Right.
very similar to the one that's already in the chat book. I mean, I think Shireen has written that question. So, keeping in mind the socio-economic dynamics of our society, which is, I mean, in India, it's not that good to say. So, how do you think, I mean, organizations like yours or other organizations could increase the affordability of tests? And, I mean, better healthcare is, everyone deserves a better lifestyle and better healthcare, right? And blood work and pathology is a key player for that, to be able to know what's going in your body. So how do you think that in general the affordability of such tests, or accessibility of such things, would be greater for all of the society? I mean, if you could say me, I mean, understand what I'm trying to say.
Right. So, Nishkash, today the problem is not that of accessibility, but is of quality.
Mhm.
Quality has to go together. Then really, you would visualize that impact, especially in a, say, semi-urban or a rural area. And that is what we've personally done. Uh, so I would give you an example. One of our business model is a point of care, setting up a point of care laboratory. So what we're doing is we're recognizing and we're acquiring small diagnostic areas in, say, semi-urban areas where there is a gap of qualitative healthcare, and we're monitoring their quality, we're giving our brand name to them, we're monitoring their quality, we're giving them our NABL processes, our policies, and ensuring that they're adhering to each one of that. We're also ensuring that every instrumentation of there is well calibrated, all the controls are being run, and finally, so for example, I'm not too sure if you've heard of a place like Kuchaman City, of a place like Bansur in Rajasthan. There we have those interventions, we have those POC labs there, which are actively contributing to that qualitative healthcare. In fact, rural healthcare is one of our major, objectives. Along with our growth plans, we also want to make that social impact where we realize that a lot of India's population that resides in those smaller areas do not have access to that qualitative healthcare.
So I understand, and that's all from my side. I mean, thank you for answering all the questions.
Right? You're welcome.
Sankalp, we have two more questions. I think both of them have been answered though.
Right, right.
Okay, so do we have any more questions?
Hi, Sankalp. Shubham here. Just had a question. Given
Right.
the recent budget announcement, we can say it is a shot in the arm for Indian healthcare. Uh, just wanted to understand on the diagnostic center, especially.
Mhm.
What is the interplay between government and private diagnostic centers,
Mhm.
especially in Rajasthan and tier 2, tier 3 cities? I
Mhm.
imagine the penetration must be very low. And given this recent budgetary push, how do you think the future interplay between private and public be? Because as far as I understand, on the hospital side, it's mostly private. It's more of a private healthcare push. Uh, I might be wrong though.
Right. No, you're right that in healthcare, a lot of spending of the customer still goes in in private healthcare, and with the uh, government interventions like the one that Atmanirbhar Yojana. Before that, there was this Pradhan Mantri Bhamasha Yojana. A lot of intervention. Government has had a lot of interventions with regards to diagnostic industry. There have been several models that have been in play. I mean, primarily one being PPP model, where say at PHC's levels and CHC's level, uh, government is tendering diagnostic services to a private player at a set fixed rates. But honestly, in my experience, it has not been a very successful initiative by government. Still, a lot of that spending that government has announced would directly go into those, uh, you know, into those interventions where government is directly reimbursing it to the customer, or to the patient. So, for example, a patient gets admitted and he gets admitted under, say, Bhamasha Yojana. So all of that, whatever claim he has, it'll be free of cost, and all the government would bear the cost of that. Hospital will get paid by a government. Diagnostic is still out of pocket. A lot of what we do is out of pocket. Even insurance does not have a very high penetration. And at, say, at PHC's level, there are very few PPPs in Rajasthan. There are some successful PPPs in other states, but really, as a private player, there are several challenges in engaging with the government as well. So those also needs to be sorted when you need to involve private players in PPP partnership.
Understood. Thanks for the nuanced answers, Sankalp. Just one final question from my side.
Right.
Since you mentioned you have been on the front line and done the groundwork, I wanted to know more about this aspect from the consumer. There is sometimes a stigma or a fear of these pathology tests, and even now we are hearing regarding the COVID vaccines, there is much hesitance. So, how do you change this consumer psychological behavior, or is that really a challenge, or would like to know your views about that aspect?
See, I think stigmas, I don't think there is stigma of getting tested. I mean, vaccine is completely a different thing, but of getting tested, a doctor has prescribed you something, you would get yourself tested to know whether, what kind of disease you're suffering from. Maybe there may be a case you would want yourself to be tested so as to know whether all your body parameters are functioning well or not. So, the challenge is not that stigma in general. If you talk about, maybe it is more about healthcare, that people have in their mind that maybe healthcare is taking too much money from people, they're not serving them right, or maybe the confidence is not great on private healthcare organizations. Honestly, I think what we do is there our core values guide us, where it's in our ethos to really serve that customer, give that satisfaction to the customer, ensure that customer gets value for its money. So I think if I hope this answers your question, Shubham.
Yeah, understood. Thanks, Sankalp.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Do we have any more questions, or shall we come to an end? All right. So, as all good things come to an end in life, so will this seminar. On behalf of our renowned institution, Kirodimal College, University of Delhi, I take this opportunity to propose a vote of thanks to those who have directly and indirectly contributed to this seminar on reimagining healthcare delivery, sessioned by Mr. Sankalp Gupta, a proud alumnus of our historical institution. At the outset, I thank our chief guest and resource person, Mr. Sankalp. We are really enlightened with your knowledge and presence. We are thankful to our honorable site supporting pillar, Dr. Seema Joshi ma'am. Furthermore, I would like to thank our principal ma'am for this enthusiastic support, Professor Vibha Singh Chauhan ma'am, who has been a constant support and guiding pathway in our lives, but unfortunately, she is not here with us today. However, a special thanks to the organizing committee, teaching, and non teaching staff for their unflinching support and coordination. Our heartfelt thanks to our students for active participation. With these warm words and a kind message, we move to the end of today's seminar. Thank you to everybody who attended this session. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you so much, Sankalp.
Thank you, ma'am.